My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, a podcast where I, your host, try to give you some tips on how you can explain all this weird, wild, crazy conspiracy stuff to the people you love most. Because that's what I've been trying to do for the past 10 years with no success.
I've been telling everybody that our government is shady, but every time I do, my family thinks I'm crazy. The Hollow Earth, UFOs, aliens invading, fluoride in the water, they swear skies daily. When I talk about these things, they think I'm crazy. There's no escaping anymore the evil that we're facing. Illuminati mind control, they're sacrificing babies. The end of days, but anyways, my family thinks I'm crazy.
What, they don't want to listen to you?
No, they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. They're just like, oh, here we go, Mark. Off again with your...
Mark being Mark again.
Yeah. So, that's the thing about podcasts is when you're on the air, and it's like therapy, If I can't talk to my family about this stuff, I'll talk to you, Matt, and all our listeners.
You just tell your whole podcast.
Yeah. So who are we talking about today, Matt?
They think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. My family thinks that I'm crazy.
The nature of nature has mystified curious minds since the dawn of humanity, when ancient revelations were recorded in stone. Since then, man has found a myriad of ways to record information, yet few have innovated in the way of receiving that information. Today's guest is amongst the few who have. As a dowser, stonemason, and Gaia-Grapher, Peter Champoux has translated his intimate knowledge of the living earth and lithosphere into the complex art and science known as arcome geometry, measuring and mapping out the biological, energetic, cultural, and metaphysical patterns into a framework that he calls the Gaia Matrix. I'm Mystic Mark, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast with Peter Champoux.
The one I've worked the most with is the Kachina Ley, which comes out of the sacred mountain of Cuchama or Mount Tequete down in the Mexico-California border. And that goes up through Hopi Land, through the San Francisco Peaks, through Hopi Land, through Shiprock, through Crestone, Colorado, through the Great Lakes, along the Ottawa River, connecting Ottawa to Montreal, Mount Katahdin, and it goes up into Nova Scotia. So it's, all the way along that line, there's this mythic landscape of native culture, giants that are sleeping, or the Kachina. I call it the Kachina Ley because I first came across it because of a straight line between San Francisco Peaks and Hopi Land, where, the Kachinas would bring water solicited by the snake dancers, the Hopi Mesa. So I said, well, that's got to be a ley line.
The 17th chapter in your book Gaia Matrix, if we could, and then you had some stuff you shared in the email that I'd love to get into as well. But the first time we had you here was such an awesome conversation. We really had a broad sort of spectrum view of everything you've been working on, and I was really grateful to have made it happen. I've listened to the episode back. It's one of the few times I've ever listened to my own podcast, but I gotta say, I was really impressed, and I'm glad you made it back here. But I don't know if we spent enough time, as much as I would like, on that one particular aspect. So if you would, could you maybe take us back to that, the Masonic age, and how this connects to the Gaia Matrix?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the Masonic age. Yeah, the Masonic age was really the Egyptian revival. That's really when things got going in a big way here in the States. But it was, the United States was a Masonic experiment. And there's a lot of power brokers at play, that were Masons. If you ever wanted to get anywhere in business, you had to be a Mason. And our founding fathers, of course, were Masons. In the actual United States Capitol, Washington, D.C., well, that's really a prime example of Masons at work, the geometry of that city and neoclassical architecture. It was all in an effort to create a civilization. Like civilizations that have lasted 1,000 years tend to incorporate sacred geometry in their design. Greece, Rome, whatever, these ancient cultures, Egypt, because it nests the culture into the fabric of the land. So while in Europe and such, the church was the one that was going around laying down foundations for cathedrals at sacred sites, like Chartres Cathedral was put on a ancient Druid holy grove. So that syncretism of laying sacred sites on top of one another, one culture taking over the next, was pretty popular in Europe, and it was done by the church, and usually is done by religious organizations. But here in the States, it was done by the Masons. For instance, one of the most sacred sites in native consciousness is Pipestone, Minnesota, where the pipes where the stone for the god. It was a perfect kind of rock. It wouldn't crack under heat, and it was easy to carve. The Masons bought that quarry and actually built their lodge there in Pipestone, Minnesota, out of that rock. But they still own the quarry, so that's kind of like, by owning that quarry, they are as a consciousness are connected to all the Chanupas. Everywhere there's a Chanupa, with that kind of rock. But back to Washington, old Georgie there, he was a 33rd degree Mason and a surveyor. So, there was a great deal of debate about where to put the capital city. And George Washington was the one that actually determined the site. And where it is right on the East Coast ley line, which I call the Acadian Ley. And they seem to have been aware of this not ancient, but in those old times there, they called it the Satan's axis, because anything west of there was howling wilderness, and east of there was a civilization, if you will, or settlements. So that line going down through, which I call the Acadian Ley, goes down through from Nova Scotia through Boston, New Haven, New York City, Trenton, Philly, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, down to Mexico City, and just a dead straight line. And it goes right through the center of Washington, D.C. So the axis where Washington placed the city was right on that ley line. Goes right through the center of the D.C. diamond. So that D.C. diamond that was laid out by a Moor, black fellow, they didn't have, at the time, they couldn't really survey with stars. The only people who knew how to do that were the Arabic peoples. So there was this fellow that they hired to lay out the Washington, D.C. diamond, which is now it's cut in half because of the Civil War. Arlington, Virginia, is the county that makes up half of the diamond, and then D.C. is the other half of the diamond. Well, that north-south axis of the diamond is on the 77th parallel. So, everything with the Masons is all about number. They try to, it's frequency. And it's a spiritual number. It's an angelic number. It's one of the numbers of power and mastery and such. But as well, that line, if you take that 77th longitude, that's what I was referring to with the 77th longitude, goes up north, goes right through the Iroquois Confederacy's home fire, where the Taradao had the central fire of the Iroquois Confederacy. So, and that's where we got our design for our federation, was through the Iroquois Confederacy. So by having that line going right through the Iroquois Confederacy, it's this syncretic overlay that was placed that connected one side to another. So there's some ceremonial magic going on there.
Wow.
Since then, since I wrote the book, I've done more research and found that there's quite a patterning of the placement of cities in a phi proportion between one another. I've got a study. If anybody wants to get a copy of it, I can send it to them. But they really look like they were creating an earth grid out of the cities.
Absolutely.
Well, like for instance, Vermont, they didn't know, okay, where do we put the capital? It should be in Windsor, and they ended up putting it in Montpelier. And so if you go from Boston through Montpelier, it goes right to Montreal. another Masonic city.
Right.
And Montpelier is at the 5 proportion, the life-giving ratio between between Montreal and Boston. So that the Boston was one of the primary Masonic lodges, and Montreal was another. So they placed Montpelier there and put that gold dome on top of its capital, and to hold that frequency of light. So I mean, I think the Masons were altruistic in their efforts, but power corrupts, absolutely. And so a few of them got out of control, and there's ceremonial magic being used down, for instance, down by you in the Skull and Bones Club with the skull of Geronimo.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Peter. As a matter of fact, yesterday on 3/22, the day we were supposed to have this conversation, I'm sure you know the significance of 3/22 as it pertains to Skull and Bones. The reason I had to delay was because I conducted a walking tour of a small group of people, and we took a walk from the bottom of High Street, right about where their tomb is, up to the cemetery where the intersection of High Street and Grove is. And the person who built the archway that goes, you walk through it to get to the cemetery is the same person that built I think the most recent renovation to the Skull and Bones tomb. But when you brought up the pipestone, I immediately thought of how the Skull and Bones tomb is built from Portland brownstone, which for those, local familiar with Connecticut, you'll know there's a town along the Connecticut River called Portland where there's this big gorge, or I forget the proper term for it, but it's like a quarry that's now filled with water where they had, mined all this brownstone, and now people swim in it. It's like an outdoor adventure park.
Oh, nice.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I definitely think that there's some significance there. I mean, I'm not versed on the Native American history of that particular place, but some ways south of there is the Matamoros State Park, which I believe we talked about our first time conversing, where there's local Native American lore of a great chief that lives underground and makes all these rumblings, and people even up into this day can hear these ominous noises that come from the ground there. But I definitely think that Skull and Bones is particularly to in the equation when we look at the particularly how the Masons have co-opted this energy grid that the people who were here prior had many, many different ways of connecting with. I mean, we talk about shamans who levitate across these ley lines or astral travel through these ley lines, and the mounds were obviously very significant. But it seems to me like when we look at Skull and Bones, they have a very acute interest in the Native Americans, and I wonder if there's a sort of spiritual warfare at play.
I think it's a kingship thing. Yale is a kingmaker, and so there is a spiritual warfare thing going on there. There, like Peabody Yale is loaded with all these native artifacts that never shown to the public. They're just down in the basement somewhere. That it's not there for a museum. There's just a collection, and I understand that there's just a horde of artifacts from Machu Picchu in there.
Wow.
And Machu Picchu, I think we said prior to this, in our last conversation, is right on the longitudinal axis of New Haven. So it's used as to empower, I believe, as a, whether they are aware of it or not, it does empower the faculty, the people, the institution of Yale, the institution of the Skull and Bones Club. Those artifacts. So you get a king like Geronimo, then you're taking the power that is the spirit of America and making it your own. Like you're like taking that power from them as a group.
Right.
So
wow. Yeah, it's something very personal to me. I mean, I met someone who is a relative, so to speak. He comes from Arizona. His tribe is a descendant of Geronimo's group of people, and he came to New Haven in a sort of spiritual kinship, you know, to develop that connection with Geronimo, to bring his spirit some peace. And when I was just, you know, excuse me, a young college student, I ran into this guy, and he really, you know, flipped my world upside down and taught me these things about Skull and Bones and how they had, you know, done what they did to Geronimo. And recently I found another corroborating article, a story of some Chicago businessmen out on a hunting party who wrangled this outlaw named the Apache Kid. And at the end of the newspaper article, they said that they sent his skull and crossbones to Yale Skull and Bones. You know, these guys out in Arizona. It's just, you know, there's lots of evidence of this kind of thing happening. And then not to mention maybe the grave robbing association that a medical school in that time period would probably want to keep under wraps, right? We know that there's a fascination with cadavers. Benjamin Franklin, you know, fits into the equation there as well.
It's sick the way they treated the native people. You know, they treated them like animals, like something to be studied, something, you know, like lab rats or something. And they felt as though it was their right to do what, you know, and take and do whatever they want because they consider them subhuman. And that's, you know, it's really, you know, the native mind and the native heart is just such a great gift to the collective consciousness has been long missed by the earth, by the collective. You know, we've lost our way as far as our relationship with planet because we've disconnected from the native mind, that indigenous mind. We've become the pyramid mind. You know, and all the whole Masonic thing was about the pyramid and you know, top down power and, you know, debt slavery, you know, you name it, you know, multi-level marketing, you know, it's just, it's all the church, the state, it's all pyramidal.
Right.
And you know, when they met, I understand when Christopher Columbus came, he in his journals, he wrote that the people that he found were Indios, not Indians, Indios, in, you know, with God. You know, so that's something that really threatens the pyramidal mind. You know, the circular mind, if you will, of the indigenous people places the, you know, Wankantanka, the creator, the source of all that is at the center, and that's in your heart. You know, so you know that's like antithetical to any kind of pyramidal church or state. So they had to crush that, you know, like, you know, with a hard hammer, because it was a sovereign relationship with Creator. You know, no filters. You know, like, you know, they didn't have to go through Jesus. They didn't have to go through Muhammad or any other, you know, church structure. And you know, if you don't go through that, then, you know, where's the money coming from, and where's the power coming from? Where's the control of the people? How do we bring fear into them? You know, so it was like, you know, the native people were really, you know, they really, I mean, they never experienced such a spirit before. And, you know, it's just my work right now to bring that spirit back to the fore and encourage that, because, you know, bring it, you know, with my work with earth rings and such, it's like, you know, it's return to the circle.
Absolutely. And that's why it's such a pleasure to have you here. And you speak it into the podcasting ether so well and bring it to mind in a whole new way. And it's so grounding too for people. You know, we get emails from people that listen to the show, and so many people have been inspired by our previous conversation to take a look at where they live and re-examine what's really there. I mean, I really had that happen last summer in a big way, looking at all of the underlooked and undervalued sacred sites here in New England, you know, Gungiwamp, which we talked about, and all of the amazing ones up north, you know, and in New Hampshire and Vermont. But yeah, if you will, I know there's been a lot of things going on. I've heard from friends that have interviewed you recently that you have some group, a men's group going on. But if you will, you know, for maybe people who haven't heard you before, could you explain to us how the Earth rings sort of are mapped out, and maybe give us a little 101 on how it connects to what's been going on in recent events with Ukraine?
Yeah, sure. Briefly, Earth rings are a completion of an arc that is in the lithosphere. In the surface of the Earth, if you look at coastlines and such, you'll see curvilinear forms, the Aleutian Islands, the Mexico, California arc, the Indonesia arc, the coast of China. So all those, those forms have a are circular. That arc is circular in nature. So you can establish a radial point, and then from that arc, and then make a circle. And you'll find, it's similar to a ley line, in that when you make those circles, there are sites that are along it that are of similar quality and energetic, and have significance to this whole pattern that it's showing. So in total, I've been working on, over the past year, mapping out all the Earth rings I could find in the planetary surface. And one of the biggest ones is, I mentioned the California-Mexico border. Well, that arc is centered in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, and it's the center of the North American tectonic plate. And it's the only plate that's circular in shape. Like Africa is like a 5 proportion, South America is like a 3, 4, 5 triangle, Eurasia, Russia is like a kind of a 5 rhomboid. So these geometries of nature are really geometries of water. Water informs matter in a geometric way: flowers, bodies, humans, and the lithosphere too. So you have underneath the surface of the Earth, about 200 to 400 miles down, or something 4 to 6, something like that, is the ringwoodite layer of water, where there's 4 oceans of water locked inside the planet. And every time there's a volcano that comes up, it comes up and there's a center point that's formed. And that's often a center point of what I'm finding is that these Earth rings have the center point is volcanic. So some kind of uplift that's occurred there. The New Madrid Fault is one center. Shelburne Falls is another batholith form that comes up. So it's in China. There's another one, the Kinnaman Gates. That's the center of the Chinese ring. So it's just a consistent thing, and I found that I first came across this working in New England, where I was working as a stonemason and seeing that the fracture. If I worked with the natural fracture of the rock, I could get more done in a day without having to cut new angles everywhere. But so I would just do that. And then I noticed that, when I was quarrying out in the forest, that a lot of that fracture has the same angle that you see in the watershed. And that started me thinking about the fractality of the surface of the planet. And so that led me to look for geometries of nature within the New England landscape. And I found that, and it ended up being circular, and it had a very specific geometry to it that was geometries of water. Water is a bonding angle of 104.5, 103.5, that type of thing, which is essentially the Great Pyramid. So the Great Pyramid is a solid form of a water interfacing with the biosphere of the planet. Long conversation on the pyramid, so I won't go there. But, I guess I'll have to if I talk about Ukraine. But as time went on, it's it's repeatable, like science, if you do the same thing and you have the same results, then, you have a working theory. And so this working theory, I had, what is it? And I started looking at the planet as a cell, and studying the cell, that the membrane of the cell is where all the consciousness is, where all the signaling happens is in the membrane of the cell. The nucleus is just there for powering up things. And so, embedded in that membrane are all these geometric shapes and rings that are called the integral membrane proteins that communicate between outside the cell and inside the cell. A cell gives off something, it takes in something, and it's, there's all this communication that goes on. So I'm feeling that as though the Earth is a living cell, single-celled organism that has this membrane with this consciousness made up of people and all of the life, and that the information is being exchanged through these earth rings. So if we can, I'm offering these earth rings as a way in which we as a species can work symbiotically with the planet and work co-creatively with the planet. So a lot of these earth rings seem to suggest a geopolitical arrangement. And Ukraine, specifically Chernobyl, or very near Chernobyl, is the center point of this earth ring that I discovered many years ago. That is defined by the arc made by the boot of Italy and Scandinavia and curving around over to the Ural Mountains, that's the eastern boundary, down along the coast of southern coast of Turkey and Greece. So it creates this curvilinear form and just another earth ring. And Ukraine is right at the center of that. So Kiev, I guess is, I've always pronounced it Kiev, but I guess it's Kiev and how they pronounce it there.
Somehow they changed it.
Yeah, is the spiritual center of, it's kind of like the Jerusalem of the Orthodox faith.
Okay.
And Saint Michael is the archangel that is kind of, holds the energy there in Kiev. And it was a pilgrimage site for all of Russia. And it was from Kiev that the whole Russian gestalt came from, the whole Russian worldview, the identity of who, being a Russian is all about. So, losing Ukraine, I fear that Russia was losing its sense of identity. And it needed that for, the sake of its, well, where are we if we don't have Ukraine? The bread basket, Ukraine feeds 600 million people. So it's really it's a critical point because there's two halves of a whole there that are in conflict. The whole Russian bloc on one side and the NATO bloc on the other. It's like both of them are looking towards supremacy over the other. So the NATO forces keep pushing. They put those bio labs pushing, next to Russia, more and more armaments next to Russia. And as a way to force Russia's hand to really, to create this supremacy. So where's this all come from? Why can't we all just live together? As Rodney King said. And that if you take the meridian, that goes through that center point of the Ukraine peninsula or the Ukraine earth ring, it's the same line as essentially the 30th parallel east, 30th meridian east, and that goes right through the Great Pyramid. So the Great Pyramid is what is attenuating the Earth cell and its membrane to come into pyramidal consciousness. Now, when you project the edges off of the Great Pyramid, for instance, the southeast edge goes right through the Kaaba in Mexico and in Mecca, the black stone right there in that black cube. I mean, right, couldn't be more accurate, as if by design that was placed right there on that ley line that comes off of the Great Pyramid. You go northeast and it goes through the Baha'i Temple and up through, Mount Hebron and, all the Jewish holy places, Mount Carmel. And, so there's a lot of religions involved with this setup of the Great Pyramid. And it's like the Great Pyramid is entraining that pyramidal consciousness into religion, into power, into structure. So where the north-south line is, which is essentially the Nile Meridian, which is, the Nile River is this really powerful energy form. The Nile River is the same diameter as the moon. So there's this resonant conversation between the two. Then you got all the stuff of the moon being a satellite and a alien construct, or it was delivered here to maintain our prison planet.
Well, and if it was, it would have been maybe in that time period prior to the Great Flood, and when, certain folks talk about Saturn being, this sort of prominent body, luminary body in the sky, almost like a sun. Have you looked into that theory at all?
Yeah. I've looked into that as that the year before the flood there was a canopy of ice. That's where all the water came from, was the canopy of ice, and that canopy created a lens, so we could see the planets a lot clearer, as if it's like a telescope. That they were very much closer, and so you see a lot of ancient petroglyphs and such that show Saturn and Jupiter, as if it's you're looking through a telescope. And, they must have had a telescope. No, they had this canopy of ice that made the stars and planets seem all much closer.
Right. And you talk about the pyramid being sort of like this, anchoring the collective planetary consciousness into a sort of solid state. Do you think the moon was placed for a similar reason? I'm speculating, of course, but what are your thoughts on the moon?
There's a lot of studies of the pyramid that related directly to the moon. So I think the two are in a working concert with one another.
Okay. And would that be true for every pyramid, or is the Great Pyramid the only candidate?
Well, that particular one has the real tight geometry in that way.
Right.
I think that there was a cult of the pyramid that went out from there. And, so you find stuff all over the place, these pyramids all over the planet. There's some interesting work done by this man by the name of John Shaughnessy. He lives up in Dalton, Mass. And he noticed that the pyramids of the world are at a 180-degree opposite side of the planet to major volcanic structures. So he feels as though the pyramids were placed there to to harmonize the destructive forces of volcanoes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And would that give any sort of, or lend any thoughts towards maybe the purpose? Because we, going back to our conversation about Native Americans, we're told by the sort of authority on archaeology and anthropology that these places were not maybe built for sacrificial means, but then along the way, somehow that became a major part of their practices, of sacrificing people on the pyramids. Does that play into this equation at all?
Well, prior to the flood, there was a whole different quality of atmosphere and energy in the planet. The standing stones hummed. Over there in England, you have that whole megalithic culture,
right?
And prior to the advent of modern fertilizers, how would you fertilize your fields? So they would place these big megaliths in the center of these fields, and it would ground the telluric energies and the electromagnetic energies, lightning, and bring that nitrogen into the soil and make things sweeter. And so there was any kind of prodigious effort like that to move these great stones and build these towers and such. Had to have the people somehow, and I feel agriculture was what was, in an archaeological record shows that the bone structure improved after the construction of stone circles.
Wow!
So it showed that food sources were greatly improved when they worked with these energies. But I think it's again, it's after the fall of the waters, there wasn't that charge within the atmosphere as there was before. So all those sites were abandoned, and the ones that that continued in use were kept going by sacrificing the life force of a human. So there was kind of a degradation of an old practice where there was this life-giving energy, but well, what do we do now? So they resorted to human sacrifice.
Right.
And and of course, a lot of that might have been population control too. It's some sad histories there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you look at the, Gaia Matrix and how you've mapped out that city ley line, it definitely makes one wonder if those same practices that were going on all the way down in Mexico have kind of shifted up towards, the, military branch of the entire world, it seems, right? Washington, D.C. and
Right.
Skull and Bones, through my research, is very much a military sort of outfit. Their whole thing is geared through Hegelianism, which is, a product of this Prussian German war state that was going on in the 1800s.
Yeah, that ley line going up the East Coast is, if you take it across the pond, it goes through, it's like the proverbial line in the sand through Europe. Like it goes right through Dublin and London, talk about, two opposing forces there. And then Brussels, where the European Union is, but then it continues on through the Franco-German border where you find Alsace-Lorraine and the Waterloo and the Battle of the Bulge. And it goes right down through Kosovo and Yugoslavia, where all that conflict of east-west, north-south all takes place. And through ancient Troy, there's more bloodshed and warfare. And it ends up going into Amman, Jordan, where the worship of Baal was, with that whole human sacrifice thing there. So you have these two routes of, the Teotihuacan over in Mexico City as being, human sacrifice over there. Then you got the human sacrifice of Baal at the other end, and then all the human sacrifice in between, in the military industrial complex that has supported the American culture since its start, as profit through suffering model. So, that needs to change. It's just these ley lines get entrained, and the more you have wars on them, the more wars occur on them. So we really need to start shifting that frequency by doing things of the opposite. Like more love making.
Exactly. Yeah.
Make love on ley lines for world service.
I wonder how much of that went on in the 60s. Did they ever do like a sort of pseudo Woodstock at Gettysburg or something like that? That would have been interesting to see. Oh,
there was a gal that contacted me who was doing part of this orgasm for peace.
okay.
She was trying to do strategic orgasms.
Just herself?
Well, no, she was working on getting a lot of people. It was actually it was a global movement at the time. To one of those things, orgasms for peace.
Well, I think there's a couple podcasts that do something like that. I'm sure. But when it comes to, solutions, we definitely always want to orient the conversation towards the solutions. I know last time we spoke, you said you're working on rewatering the West. I recently had a really great conversation with a guy named Mitch who uses orgone to bust towers, and he's even seen some cloud seeding happen from certain orgone placements, especially in conjunction with where 5G towers are and different other installments of that nature. Have you looked into orgone at all, or thought about the this possibility? I know Wilhelm Reich is kind of famous for orgone energy. It's not quite the same as what Mitch makes, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've used orgone pucks in activating. Well, specifically, we're activating the Great Lakes. We placed a whole bunch of them all around the Great Lakes, and it was the same it was the same design puck. And I think when you have the same design, same setup, same size, and place them geometric, that's what we were doing around the Great Lakes. It activates the Great Lakes and draws in water, and because water wants to bond with water, and these orgone devices tend to attract water, attract clouds, like what's his name, Wilhelm.
Well,
Was doing the cloud busting stuff, and so absolutely, orgone works. It's good stuff.
right on. Well, it's good to hear some corroboration there. But I know we talked a lot about stones and their ability to tap into these sort of unseen forces. Have you seen more success using stones with the same intention and purpose?
Well, what I do when I'm out in the field and don't have orgone, I use gold leaf. So as I place gold leaf or gold, the frequency of gold is something that connects the worlds. The Kogi of northern South America, Venezuela, Colombia border, and the Sierra Madre mountains there, they remained isolated for 500 years and kept the knowledge. And one of the pieces of knowledge was that gold is not a monetary value. It's only a spiritual value. So the Inca had all this gold because they were trying to ground his spiritual energy and transmit his spiritual energy between the earth and the cosmos. So the Kogi would place gold effigies at their sacred sites. So with that in mind, I take, whenever I create a medicine wheel, if I'm, doing a large scale, like activation of a ley line across the country, I put in, I use a 9 stone ring, which is, the 369 of Tesla and everything else that's implied with it. But that 9, the geometry, you come up with 4 polygons, and those polygons have these like nested circles within them, and those circles relate directly to the sizing of the planet. So when you put a neogram stone ring down in the ground, it's communicating directly with the planet. And so the ley line gets activated because of that consistent frequency and pulse of 9. But to have a continuity through all the different stone circles, which are using different minerals, because I'm just using the stone that I find locally, I use gold leaf underneath each of the 9 stones to act as an attenuator, to connect the worlds and connect those energies and get a spiritual flow going.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. And I have to ask, considering the sort of ominous nature of some of these ley lines, do you think that, activating them is a way to sort of purge that energy that sort of remained there over the course of time? Or are you, avoiding those heavier, more bogged down ley lines and activating maybe other ones that are lesser known?
Yeah, I've done some work with the Eastern Ley, but it's kind of hard to work with because it's so inundated with those energies you just mentioned. Probably the one I've worked the most with is the Kachina Ley, which comes out of the sacred mountain of Cuchama, or Mount Tequete, down in the Mexico-California border. And that goes up through Hopi Land, through the San Francisco Peaks, through Hopi Land, through Shiprock, through Crestone, Colorado, through the Great Lakes, along the Ottawa River, connecting Ottawa to Montreal, Mount Katahdin, and it goes up into Nova Scotia. So it's, all the way along that line, there's this mythic landscape of native culture, giants that are sleeping, or, the Kachina, I call it the Kachina Ley because I first came across it because of a straight line between San Francisco Peaks and Hopi Land, where, the Kachinas would bring water solicited by the snake dancers, the Hopi Mesa. So I said, well, that's got to be a ley line, so I just extended it. It ended up being connected to all these other native sacred sites in a diagonal across the country. So ley lines tend to be diagonal rather than north, south, or east, west. And this one is, like, the main indigenous line that goes across the country. So I was working that because there was a great drought that was happening in Navajo land. I had a buddy up there. Everybody was suffering because of the lack of water for like 7 years. And what I determined was the reason why there was no water getting into Navajo land was because of the conflict between the Hopi and the Navajo. So I went and put a medicine wheel right on the border there in the disputed territories of Navajo land and Hopi land. And, a month later, it started to rain. And, that rain crossed the border and, it gave a pathway for the Kachinas to move through. So, like I was saying earlier, there's a consciousness that humans, nature responds to the emotions of humans. That was something that Rudolf Steiner said. And, with all this conflict between the Hopi and Navajo, it's putting a stop to the flow of water. It's putting a stop to the flow of life, between, with both tribes. So I was, I worked to mend those, on a quantum level and, let them work it out how they, how they'll work it out. I'm not going to puppet them at all. It's just, here's an opening, here's an opening for flow to happen.
Right. That's awesome, man. And I think that's something that I tried to do with the walking tour yesterday, being, 322. I didn't want to, make a big scene or anything, but I thought just being aware of these things on this day could maybe shift the energy in a positive way. And I think you're doing that to a science, and it's really inspiring to see. I mean, the Kachina, for people who aren't familiar, can you describe those a little bit? Because my grandparents were quite the travelers. They drove all across the United States, and they brought a little Kachina doll home with them as a souvenir from, I assume, Arizona. But can you explain the significance of those?
Well, they're nature spirits. They're powers. They're the powers of nature in an animist expression.
Right.
It's there's I don't know, a lot of different Kachinas, different purposes, and
Now,
I can't really name them off. But the rain Kachinas come from San Francisco peaks. They're in the out here in the west. The mountains are what creates the water. So the heat from the valley gets drawn up the side of the mountain, and then it turns into a cloud, and that cloud then lightning and thunder, then rain, and then the clouds move out, and then you have these monsoon storms that happen here in Arizona,
right.
in the summer. So that's the Hopi snake dance. They do it every 2 years. It's specifically to draw the water to their cornfields. And that's the water Kachinas who live in the San Francisco peaks. So there are different places where the Kachinas live, not like one is San Francisco peaks, another place is Shiprock. And those two places are in alignment with the Hopi Mesa, where the snake dance is done.
Right.
So that's what creates a ley line, a series of natural and cultural features that have a similar quality and attribute.
Right.
Over a distance.
Well, and I think it's important to ask, maybe, because I think there's a little bit of an association that the ley lines become like a road for these beings to travel along. How much stock do you put into that? I know there's this sort of lore of like the roads of the dead that like were created in England and other places to be like specifically for the souls to travel on. They weren't designed for people to travel on. Do these ley lines function in a similar way?
Yeah, I do believe they do. There's an extra amount of spirit along these lines, and it's like almost the pathway of angels or something.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely brings, a lot of positive, imaginative sort of, it makes you want to travel there, but then you hear these stories of like skinwalkers and dogmen and these other maybe less friendly beings that also travel these ley lines, and I don't know, it makes you think twice. I know local to New England, there's the Bridgewater Triangle. They sort of see certain creatures there, but have you come across anything like that? Any stories that go along with that theory that these skinwalkers and such are using the ley lines to travel?
Well, they certainly favor the energetic, they haunt the energetic places, the places of power.
Right.
And it's like skinwalkers and those kind of discordant expressions of spirit, kind of are found where this ley energy has short-circuited. So they're just like an expression of, a loose electric cable that's going around zapping people.
Yeah, I think we ought to recommend building.
And I think that they come into those places as a way to heal them, like taking on the negative energies, transforming them. But I mean, it's spirit is always in service. It's even the devil's in service.
Right.
It's just
Yeah, everyone plays their role. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask, maybe if people should go over to Skinwalker Ranch and place down some enneagrams with the gold leaf on them, but it sounds to me like the right thing's already happening. If the
right thing's already happening.
Yeah, it's transmuting.
Yeah, that's pretty close to the 42nd parallel and the alignments of east-west mountain ranges. If you go across the 42nd, you find a lot of east-west mountain ranges, the Caucasus Mountains, the Mount Holyoke, just north of you, the Mount Holyoke Range goes east-west, and the Uinta Range, which the Skinwalker Ranch is right at the base of, is also east-west, and that's the 42nd parallel as well.
Right.
And that 42nd is like an empire line. It goes through Rome, it goes through Beijing, it goes through Boston. A lot of the Masons, when they set up, like surveyed the state boundaries, the 42nd parallel is one of them that they use for the boundaries, California, Oregon, Wyoming, Colorado,
Connecticut,
New York,
Massachusetts, right?
Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, So it's a frequency of power. So like the Skinwalker Ranch, in my, conversation would be kind of like the discordant energies of these empires that are attenuating that particular latitude frequency of the planet. The latitudes are frequency energetics, like the equator, the 19.5 degree latitude, has a lot of volcanoes on it and such.
Right.
It's like the solar plexus to the planet.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
so
considering your great knowledge of the Earth, what are your thoughts on Hollow Earth and how they fit into this conversation? I wonder if, because recently I had a great conversation with a gentleman who's gone at great length to study a very specific area in Kentucky, the Somerset. In the Somerset area, it's called the Pennyroyal Ridge, and a lot of strange things happen there. There's a very high level of magnetic force, geomagnetic force in that area, and there also happens to be, the largest cave system there, the Mammoth Caves.
Yeah. I have to say that I'm not really that versed on the inner Earth. I've looked briefly, or read a couple of books on the subject, and it seems to me that there's subterranean, like Telos out in Mount Shasta, for instance. It's there's a city underneath Mount Shasta. People have gone there, and gave testament to being there, and so. They exist within these caverns. And I think civilizations over time have, especially when, after the fall, things got really irradiated here on the surface. And a lot of the hominoid species couldn't handle the sun, but us, we can, but we can only handle it for a short, brief, lifespan. But, these other species of hominids are, went underground, and they have their cities down there. And I have a friend, Peter Moon, that writes extensively about the underground cities of Romania, underneath Romania, and the cave systems down there.
Oh, wow.
So it's and there's legends all over the planet that there's underground cities. But
Right.
as far as the whole Admiral Byrd thing of going through the center and like having an interior sun and the surface having a second surface, the physics of it all just doesn't click with me.
Understandably so. Yeah, it is one of the further out there theories. I mean, in this community, we have a lot of very militant people who will tell you the earth is flat, and then you'll have a lot of very people who will never even hear them out. So it's hard to tell, and I think Hollow Earth seems to be a safe place to go compared to round or flat. But I've sort of resignated to just saying we live in a realm, and whatever you want to see, you'll find evidence to see it somehow. But yeah, it definitely feels like you could get on a small boat when you start thinking in those terms, But I want to know, there's a lot of conversation about UFOs correlating with these ley lines, and people sometimes talk about them being like UFO highways. Have you seen that to be true through your research? Do you think that it's purely the, east-west latitude and longitudinal lines, or do you think that these UFOs are following the more circular Gaia Matrix sort of earth rings that you're plotting?
Well, that seems like a good study to engage in, to just, get the information from UFO.
Dot it out, yeah.
Yeah, and dot it out, see how they all do arrange. But, there's a lot of, there was one. I mean, they occur along the meridians and ley lines and in certain latitudes that, like the 37th, I think 37.5 or something like that latitude is like the UFO, called the UFO highway across the country. And that's also the 3630, kind of very close to the 3630 where the Missouri Compromise was, and it's also right there where the Trail of Tears was, and the New Madrid seismic zone is. And I know some Taos Pueblo folks that they go up to their Blue Lake, their sacred Blue Lake up there on Mount Wheeler above them, and they often, and that's right on the 37 on the UFO highway, where Dulce is, where Area 51 is, and so you get this like an attenuation there of that specific thing. But that's also very close to that 38 parallel, which is, the where Washington, D.C. is, where the border between, North and South Korea. So there's a lot of this nuclear tension that's on that frequency, that line. So, and the UFOs have been shown that they're very concerned about nuclear energy. And, they go and switch off nuclear bomb sites and stuff. And, kind of surprised the generals. And, so, working that line, it also goes over through Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and all that stuff, So again, they might be like skinwalkers working a frequency to try to mitigate this nuclear threat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's an optimistic take I'm willing to put stock in, because it seems to me like we have more people saying that these aliens are here to help us. It seems like the conversation has shifted towards them being more of an intergalactic, interdimensional nature rather than, from another plane, from another place. So, yeah, I think that understanding the Earth's energy must be crucial to how they get here, wherever they're from, whether it be another dimension or even underground or in the ocean. There's talk about USOs, right? Unidentified submersible objects. That's what it is. Yeah. Well, Peter, I feel like, we could talk for great length of time, and I do want to have you back on. Unfortunately, I don't have the most time, but I do want to give you a chance to give people a big, a good idea of what you're up to now, how they can support, how they can follow up with you. I hope that folks have picked up some of your books. The Moon River book and Gaia Matrix are two books that I own. I'm sure there's more that I have to pick up, but can you let us know what you're working on and what people can expect when they go and check out your work?
Well, I apologize for my website. It's needing of updating by many, many years. And my Moon Rivers and Ontario is out of print. I failed to sign my global agreement, so I haven't, set that back up again. But Gaia Matrix is available. American Society of Dowsers bookstore is a good source. Vortex Maps is another source for that. They sell them for $135 on Amazon if you want to spend that much money, but other sites are the $30 for. My email, my website is geometryofplace.com, and it's just my name on Gmail. If you want to get a hold of me, but my present focus of interest is Wounded Knee. I went out there last Wounded Knee in the Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota. I went out there last July and found it to be a Masonic installation that has entrapped and kind of bonded the native consciousness as the omega point of the Indian wars. So there's all that Holocaust, all that native Holocaust, all that collective trauma is just in a big knot there around this mass grave that was ghosted. The band of Bigfoot was ghosted. They were the ghost dancers. And then that was a power that the church just wouldn't put up with. And they went in there and consciously circled these people in a sacred circle of death and killed them all. And, over a 9-hour period, they hunted everyone down, just stabbing men, women, and children, mutilating a lot of the women and children. And then the following day, the grave diggers, came along and stripped the bodies of all the ceremonial objects and buried them separately. And they were all taken and moved to, after the fact, they got these artifacts and found a buyer out in Massachusetts, out in Barre, Massachusetts, near the Quabbin, and which is right along this ley line that goes from Boston up the Mohawk Trail, along the Mohawk Trail, up through the Mohawk River Valley, through the Iroquois Confederacy, over through the Great Lakes and down into Pine Ridge and right by Wounded Knee. So the artifacts are being held in a place where originally was, the King Philip's War it was the alpha point of the Indian Wars. It was that war defined this idea of the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And it went on from there. There are a lot of massacres in Massachusetts and on up through New York State and all across the country. The Holocaust of the native people, 40 million people killed. And so that's all tied up in Wounded Knee, and it's in this. It's kind of like in this ghost dance of repeating this energy of this the drama triangle of hero, perpetrator and victim. And the 1974 AIM takeover of Wounded Knee was kind of like just an echo of that. That same energy. So we're right now, we're actually this April 6th, I'm part of a delegation that's going to Barre, Massachusetts to demand the return of these sacred artifacts back to the people of the Lakotas and the Dakotas and Nakotas, as well as the Bigfoot band. Our plan is to take some of the, they even have scalps and stuff involved in this collection. So, those will be ceremonially, returned to the land. We have microbiologists that are going to analyze the blood that's on the artifacts to determine which family, to determine the DNA so that the artifacts can go to the proper family for them to do, to have a resolution, of all of this energy. So it's kind of like it's this healing that we're trying to make so that that whole wounded knee thing is just suppressed. The name, think of the name, wounded knee. It's like the Indian people can't hold their own weight.
Right.
Because they're in this state of constant suppression of human spirit. They're not allowed to express life in their own worldview. They're being forced into that pyramidal form. So I'm writing, I've written an article that'll be published in the next publication of New Observations magazine, which is a free online magazine that you can read. It's a PDF, or you can buy it as a paper form. But I'm part of an issue that's devoted exclusively to Wounded Knee. What happened there, what really happened there, and what from an academic point of view, and I'm writing it from a geomancer's point of view, and how to rectify that. Like right now, the graveside, the alignment of the graveside is at 33 degrees northwest. So it's like there was some mason on site that said, okay, dig the hole right here at 33 degrees, and that goes right to Rapid City. And Rapid City is like in the state of apartheid with the native people there, between the natives and whites. And it's like, it's just death for the native people if they go there. And just 3 degrees to the north, it goes right to Bear Butte, which is the kind of the holy land of the Plains Indians. It's where everybody went for vision quests and such. The Great Bear, the hero. So right. It's like I'm trying to talk as a geomancer, I'm trying to talk the Lakota people into getting this reorientation somehow of the grave site, so that the ancestors have a clear path and portal northward. To release. They're kind of these Lakota spirits are trapped. They're trapped by their own people because there's this Wounded Knee Survivors Association, so it's like this victimhood thing, and everybody's in a victim state. So by changing this orientation back to the Great Bear, the Bear Butte, there would be this release of spirit that would happen, and an opening of and a return of the native consciousness to the world consciousness, which we desperately need right now. So that's my mission right now, and so we're going to take the ideas to get these artifacts and create a sacred bundle, and get a contingent of Lakota people to carry it across the country, to weave the native consciousness back into the land, to give tribes along the way an opportunity to create a happy trail of tears. To transform that energy of death, to look at, wow, what did the native people provide, for the world, it's like the whole world got to come together in this one place, and they're our hosts, that what an honored position, that they are in to host the whole planet. And and to step up to that responsibility and teach us from the depth of their own knowledge, how to live well in the earth is really their piece. So I'm just into encouraging that to happen. So,
wow, Peter, you are doing tremendous work, and I'm so happy to hear that come to fruition. Specifically, if there's anything we can do in Connecticut help with that Barre, Massachusetts thing, whether it's just showing up in solidarity, I would love to be a part of that. I'm certain the drive wouldn't be too far, but wow, that is so inspiring. And I think that's exactly what we need to do, is transmute the trail of tears from sad tears to tears of joy, and like you say so beautifully, bring this energy of their consciousness into the world before it's, crushed in the pyramid.
Thank you. Good synopsis.
Wow. Peter, this has been a real pleasure. I'm sorry we had to cut it short, but
it's great. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much.
You inspire me. I was able to speak well and quickly and get a lot of information out. And so thank you.
Thank you. Well, it is a pleasure. I mean, you do know so much, so I'm certain that I'll be emailing you again, whether for my show or another show. I'll be in touch, but until next time, have a great moment, and thank you so much for listening. All right, what an excellent conversation with Peter Champoux. He really knows what is what when it comes to the landscape magic, the little secrets of the rocks, the mountains, and all of the different amazing features of the natural landscape, something that was a big part of my research last year, my research this year. You know, Peter Champoux arrived to my girlfriend Tara and I very synchronistically through a suggestion made by our friend Michael Wan after we had told him about a number of books that we had found on our way through various used bookstores. Something that I really enjoy doing. And after recently moving into a new place, I realized that as much as it is nice to own this many books, it is quite a lot of work. So help me lighten the load, folks. Join the Patreon book club at $33 a month. I'll send you a book, and if you stick around in the tier for more than a month, then I'll hook you up with some extra stuff too. Sometimes I'll send 2 books. Some people who stick around for a long time, I'll send them a valuable book. Not that each book isn't valuable in and of themselves, but you know, something like a hardcover or maybe a book that I have trouble parting with, you know, that sort of thing. So definitely a lot of awesome bonus stuff to be had on the Patreon at every tier, whether it's $2, $3, $5, however much you can support us with. And I've had a rough week, folks, very busy. Sorry about the hoarseness in my voice. Rough day. Show us some love with a one-time donation. Check out the merch store. Those are all great ways to support the show. Next up in today's Wednesday double feature, I know last week we didn't do an extended outro, but this week we got my new buddy Shane Jones, who emailed me about how this podcast has inspired him. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you so much, Shane. And I gotta put it out there, Shane is relentless. He's a good dude in the best possible way. You know, he really kept on me, said, hey Mark, we got to do a show together. I want to talk to you about this and that. I said, okay. First time came around, I got busy. I had to reschedule. It didn't bother him one bit. He stuck around, and we did an episode a couple days ago. Last night actually. And it was great. It was really nice connecting with Shane, and his podcast is just getting off the ground. It's called Inquiries of Our Reality. And yeah, best of luck to you, Shane. I really appreciate you joining me on the show. And it was a great conversation. He shared his story with us, told us about some of the weird, fascinating, bizarre, and paranormal things that have happened to him. We talked about his use of psychedelics and how that unlocked some doors for him. And then we talked about the cannabis industry, industry that he knows very deeply. He works in the Michigan cannabis industry. And like I said, it's always cool when people reach out and say that the show inspired them to start their own. And if you're out there listening and you have a podcast, hit me up. I have a podcast cooperative called Alt Media United, and we're growing every day. More and more podcasts join in. There is no obligation to be a part of it. All you need is a podcast or any form of content creation, really. If you're an artist, get in touch with us. There are ways that you can help out. If you're a musician, it might be tough, but there are ways for you to help out. Now, I will say, if you have some music that you want to put on the show, just know it has to be commercial CC 4.0, commercial copyright 4.0, because we don't use any licensed music on this podcast. It's all CC 4.0, free for anyone to use, reuse, redistribute, even for commercial purposes, hence the 4.0 status. There are other sorts of copyright licenses. The proper term is escaping me right now, but if you are a musician and you have music that you're willing to part with, send it my way. I'm always open to hearing it, and I am looking for interpretations of the theme song. If I like your theme song submission, not only will I use it on the show, but I will plug your band or your work in every episode description that I use the intro song. To qualify, you got to use sound bites or sound clips from the podcast. You can go back and use the same one that you hear in the intro song that we use now, the conversation between my friend Matt and I. That was a part of episode 1. My friend Ark from Destiny Lab took parts of that conversation and mixed it into the intro song that you know and love. But I'm always open to changing it up, and I think a different intro vibe for a different show vibe, like other shows, really awesome shows like the Higher Side Chats. I know they do that. Greg puts, different outro songs depending on what the vibe of the show was. And I like that. I'm very much someone who believes in taking what you think is working and inspiring and mixing it into your art. They say all art is stolen. I like to say, all art is collaborative, because here we are in this connected collective consciousness, all creating our own unique co-creation in the vast sea of consciousness and conspiracy, because this is a conspiracy podcast, folks. And if you are looking for that conspiracy goodness, don't worry. This Monday, we've got a legend, a living legend in the conspiracy research world, joining us on the show for episode 155. If you're on Rockfin, you already know who that is. But if you're not, stick around for Monday or sign up on Rockfin. Get it for $9 a month. You don't just get that, you get a whole bunch of other awesome content creators, tinfoil hats on there. Obviously, Isaac Wisetop is another person I watch on there. I like watching Broken Sim. Sometimes I'll check out my friends in the cooperative. Legit Bat is always streaming on Rockfin. Expanding Realities on Rockfin all the time. All sorts of great podcasts on Rockfin, and we're there too. And if you like getting the video version of the show, that's the best place to do it, because YouTube is just bound to censor us. And unfortunately, the only way besides Vimeo to upload videos to Patreon is through YouTube. So we'll see. I'm sure there will be better platforms in the near future. And as I start to take more things off my plate here, I'll get more things done in that realm. And it's all the more easier with your support. So like I said, join us on Patreon, Rockfin, with a one-time donation through our website, myfamilythinksimcrazy.com. And you can also just join in on Telegram and include yourself in the conversation. That's awesome as well. I'm always really happy to see people chiming in with different positive messages, telling each other about what's going on in their day, synchronicities that they heard happen in their lives, or rather happened in their lives while, listening to the show, hearing certain things that connected to their life. I love seeing that kind of stuff. So go over to the Telegram, leave me a voice message if you want to air yourself on the show, be sure to leave your name in the message, and I'll play it on the show. But without further ado, let's go over to our interview with Shane Jones from the Inquiries of Our Reality podcast. Thank you for being here, folks, and enjoy the second part of this podcast. Wednesday, Peter Champoux joining us a second time, and Shane Jones joining us for the first time. Well, let's get into it, brother. For everyone tuning in, thank you so much for being here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Today on the show, we have Shane Jones, and he's got all sorts of interesting things to share with us. But first and foremost, Shane, tell us a little bit about yourself for those who may never heard of you before. I know you're just getting started with your podcast. So before you get into your full story, tell us who you are and, what you've been up to lately.
Well, my name's Shane, recently new to the podcast game, I guess you could say. I'm about to publish my third episode, so still looking for some more guests and different people to have on. But essentially the idea is the podcast is called Inquiries of Our Reality. So the whole concept is just I've had a lot of questions about, the reality we live in. And it's all just me trying to get to the bottom of it. It's all just for, everybody that wants to listen, of course, can listen. But it's self-exploration for myself to, answer all these questions that I've had my whole life that, I haven't been able to ask people because I'm sure from this, your name of your podcast and stuff, you can't really talk to everybody about these kinds of topics.
Right. So what was the initial inspiration? I mean, maybe not going all the way into your story just yet, but were there any podcasts you were listening to that inspired you? I'm not trying to outside of this one, obviously, but what were some of the inspirations, maybe even other things besides podcasts?
Honestly, my main ones that I'd say I'd always listen to was, of course, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy has always been one of my favorites. Tinfoil Hat, just like anybody, I guess. Just a mix of all the main ones, I guess you could say. And then I kind of would dive into topics depending on, what the topic happened to be for the show for the day. And then as far as past that, I just I had a lot of questions I wanted to answer that I wasn't fully getting answered from just, researching stuff myself on the internet. So I figured my next best step would be to start a podcast and be able to ask people these questions directly and, start to essentially unravel the mysteries of our reality.
So let's get into that. When did this all start for you? Were you a black sheep? Were you into this weird stuff when you're really young, or was it relatively recently that you started to get into this stuff?
Starting at a young age, of course, I was that kid that, at the Scholastics book fair, I'd look for anything that had anything about UFOs or, any type of weird folklore, fairy tales, because I always kind of had this weird hankering that there was something else here that we didn't quite understand. And I just wanted to start to be able to understand it. And the more I dug into things, I kind of realized that almost anything in this community is definitely connected in some way, shape, or form, be it, spiritual consciousness or, interdimensional beings. Everything somehow has a weird connection that it all comes back to. So I've explored a bunch of different topics throughout my life, and they all kind of come back to the same thing. So again, came back to the podcast that I figured the next best thing would be just to start asking all the questions myself.
Right. And that's something that I definitely can relate to, man, feeling like, oh, wow, who relates with this stuff in my immediate surroundings? And really it was slim to none, and it wasn't until I started podcasting that this community started to broaden. But you mentioned having some sort of synchronistic points that you've recognized, maybe a through line from an early age. Can we start from the beginning and take us through, maybe what led up to your podcast and this interest and curiosity and all these fringe things that we talk about here?
Oh, for sure. So I guess starting back at the beginning, I had kind of a mixed family, I guess. One side was, Christian religious, and then the other side was my grandma was 100% a Cherokee. So, she kind of had that whole concept of, living off the land and there being I guess you say nature beings, so to speak, and rather than being a one God kind of concept. So starting from that, I started getting into just knowing that there was kind of just more to everything than what we were told in just all these different viewpoints. So at a young age, I started getting this weird thing where I would go to sleep. And then when I woke up, I would see myself sleeping there. And when I was a young kid, it kind of started off just, kind of interesting, where it was just, I'd wake up, see myself, nothing spectacular would happen. It was just kind of like a dream state. You're just a young child, so you don't really think about it. I don't know the exact age that it started at, but it progressed into something a little bit more as I started getting older. It was kind of like this weird feeling, though, when you're there, that there's something like watching you, but there's nothing there. It was just like that Sixth Sense kind of feeling, So going into it a little bit more, right after I would have these experiences, even at a young age, I would get sleep paralysis right after, where it would scare the hell out of me and I wouldn't be able to move. And I didn't know what to do when I was a kid, so I just kind of got used to that being a thing that happened. So going a little bit farther in, like I said, I had the religious side of my family and stuff like that, where my mom always wanted to go to church and stuff like that. And I was always interested in the stories, but I don't really want you to ask why when it comes to any of the stories. They kind of just want it to be exactly what it is. And it's not even that you're trying to be rude or tear anything apart. It's just, you won't understand things. And coming from a kid where, I started having these weird experiences, I just wanted to start understanding like these other, expanded concepts of, where we could be and what reality that we're actually in. So then go forward to a little bit more to where I'm a teen and stuff, and they start getting a little bit more like ominous feeling, I guess you could say, a little bit darker. So when I would go into it and stuff, I wouldn't go anywhere weird or anything. Like I said, it would just be like, I would see myself sleeping, I'd be in my room and stuff like that. But there's just this like I said, that feeling of somebody watching you. It kind of started becoming like a darker sinking in the pit of my stomach kind of feeling. But again, I never really saw anything. So the only weird place I ever really went to was there's this one particular time that I can remember extremely vividly, where the best way to describe it is the middle of space, and there's like a purple nebula, and you're inside of that, and you're not really walking anywhere, you're not really floating anywhere, you're just kind of in it. And I only remember being in it for like a second, and then I woke back up, and I was back in my body, and I thought it was a dream, except for the fact that I got the sleep paralysis directly after. So that started making me question, like, where was I actually at? Where would I have possibly gone? So then after that was when I would get the sleep paralysis, but I'd start noticing like moving shadows around, but it'd be just me by myself in my room. So there wouldn't be any sort of anybody in there that would have been moving around. So I kind of started getting that, I said, sinking feeling that something was watching me, but there was like shadows around me. So going a little bit farther in, I started just messing with people just to kind of test this out, just to see if it was me just coming up with something in my head, or to see if it was me actually doing something weird. So I would spend the night at like my friends' houses and stuff like that, and I would fall asleep, and I would like dream travel and stuff like that, and I would like move things when I was there, just to different spots and stuff like that. And then I would like joke with my friends and stuff like that, say like, oh, I saw you sleeping like this, and I saw this kind of thing, where it was more just like a joke, just to kind of see what their responses would be, to know if those things actually happen. And the things that I moved would actually be moved, but not that you could like drastically move anything. It was more like you kind of like went through things a little bit. So the most you could really do was just kind of like a small movement of things, because you weren't like a physical thing when you're in that sense, because you could like, I don't know, kind of like feel through things. You almost felt like you're like transparent. So then going into high school and stuff like that, I started just, again, joking with my friends with this stuff. And then I went to sleep one night, and one of my friends was there with me. And we kind of like looked at each other, and he pretty much ended up telling me that he's had these experiences randomly through his life, and that they hadn't happened in a long time since he was a kid. And then that night that we were hanging out at each other's house, he got pulled back into it, and he was in it with me, and we didn't go anywhere or see anything crazy again, but we both felt that weird, ominous thing watching you. And we saw shadows kind of moving off in the distance, but again, you couldn't really quite make out what it was. So I always had this weird feeling that there was something kind of like around the corner. So then that went on for a little while, and then I stopped remembering my dreams all of a sudden. That was an important part. And I would still get sleep paralysis, but I still to this day don't really remember my dreams too much. So it always kind of made me wonder why I don't remember my dreams, because then all of a sudden I started getting vivid dreams every once in a great while where they would be, there's really weird, vivid things where it almost didn't feel like a dream and it felt like I was somewhere else again, but it would be different people, different places, different things going on. So then going forward again, I never really told my family or my girlfriend or anything like that about this. So then one night I'm sitting in my girlfriend's room when we're together, and I hear a boom in the hallway, and then she pops up and looks at me, and I go, "You good?" And she goes, "I was just walking down the hallway and I fell." I was like, "I heard a boom." She was like, "Well, what do you mean you heard a boom?" So then I kind of had to get into the story a little bit and start telling her about this kind of weird stuff going on, because I've always heard that, like, if there's people that do that kind of stuff, that they'll push it onto people around them, and sometimes they'll experience weird things like that. And that was the one and only time that she ever experienced that. But after that, my dreams got a little bit more vivid again, where it wasn't like I was saying anything spectacular going on. I would just be in like weird places and stuff, but it would be like not like off this planet kind of places, just like, and I'm trying to think of like good examples, just like random cities, just walking around and stuff like that. But they'd be like really, really vivid dreams where it'd be like once every couple months I would have this dream, and it'd be I'd remember every single detail of it when I woke up, but every other night I wouldn't remember any aspect of my dreams. So going in a little bit more forward into the future, and this is the part where I was saying the synchronicities kind of start to play in. So I had this weird dream where best way to describe it, I guess, is almost like dimension hopping, where there was my girlfriend, but she was different in each one of these places. And when I went to each one of these places, I was just trying to find her. But every time I found her, she was a totally different person. And when I woke up and I came back, it was almost like each time I went to another place, it was like the same experience. So when I finally woke up for the last time and it was actually her laying next to me, it was, I'm not normally like a very emotional guy or anything like that, but like that dream freaked me out and it like made me cry and stuff because I didn't know what was going on. I felt like like I said, it was extremely vivid and I was hopping through these different realities and I finally found my way back. But when it was going on, I didn't know if I was ever going to find my way back because I didn't understand what was going on in the dream, or if it was a dream, I'm not 100% sure. And that's part of the answers I'm still trying to figure out here. And I figured out if I talk about this kind of experience and stuff, maybe I can get some more people that have some more experiences and maybe they can shine a little bit more light on it. But then going a little bit more forward into it, my girlfriend and I were trying to have a child, and we ended up losing one of them to a miscarriage. And I had a really tough time going on when that was going on. So I had a really weird, vivid dream where that same place that I told you I saw a long time ago, that was almost like the galaxy, I was back in that place, and there was a child that looked like me. And he said, "That one isn't the right one for me. That's not a good vessel. I'll see you on the next one." So then 6 months later, I realized I'm having another boy again, which was extremely weird. And I'm still trying to wait for it to play out because the boy in that dream was, I'd say, about 7 years old. So I'm trying to see if when my kid reaches 7, if it's the same exact face, same exact everything, because then I would be even more curious if there's even more to this consciousness than what we think there is, because like how else would you have been able to see that face? Or even going off that, going into other dimensions and stuff. I mean, if time's not linear, and I was dimension hopping, so to speak, in my sleep, then maybe I was able to see him in another dimension in a sense too. But that's going into another whole weird concept that, again, I'm still trying to figure out all this stuff for myself. But so then coming from that, I kind of going into a little bit of the psychedelic realm here. I started experimenting a little bit with psychedelics to try to see if I could kind of figure this stuff out and see if there was just more to the other side that I could start to see. I started listening to a lot of like Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, a bunch of different like philosophy type things, trying to understand what there might be possibly on this other side. But from my experiences, it was never necessarily like a religious thing. It was more of like a consciousness thing where I never saw like any kind of like creatures or anything necessarily. It was just that weird cosmic place that I went to twice that I always get stuck on, and I just always replay in my head, and I'm just trying to figure out what that place was exactly. But I guess you're going into the little bit of the mushroom stories too. When I started trying to figure that stuff out, the first particular time that I took them, I wasn't necessarily ready for it. And it wasn't my thought, but I started getting this, it was almost like a projected idea into my head that was pretty much saying, like, you didn't respect us, so we're not going to show you what you need to see, kind of a thing. So then I ended up having the worst trip of my entire life. I swear, I was staring at the clock. I rolled 2 blunts. I went outside. I smoked both those blunts. I came back inside. It was only 20 minutes. I don't even understand how that's possible. I must have just been sitting there just chiefing it out, trying to like make the time go by faster. So then I don't mess with those at all. I actually learn how to do that kind of thing and like grow them myself. So then here I am another year, say probably like 8 months or so later after figuring out all the methods and everything like that. And I experienced them myself again with my own things. But when I did this time, I got the same kind of projected thought in the back of my head, but now it was saying that you understand now. So now you can see what we have to show you. And when that happened, I kind of got that same feeling that I originally got when I was a kid that something was watching me, where it wasn't really like a dark feeling, but I got the same feeling from the mushrooms. And then that made me wonder that, is there something else that's around us that we can't necessarily see, that we might have to vibrate on these higher vibrations in order to see? Where when I had the childlike innocence, it was more of that happy level, where when I started becoming a teenager, you know, if there's dark entities out there, of course, they're going to preach on somebody that's, you know, an emotional teenager, rather than, you know, because they'd be the easiest to be able to manipulate if they had some kind of weird agenda for them and stuff like that. So I go down that path a little bit. I don't quite find all my answers that I'm trying to find. So, you know, of course, listening to Terrence McKenna and stuff like that, I start sparking an interest in trying to figure out the whole concept with like DMT and near-death experiences and stuff like that, and these different entities that people see and these different experiences they have. And the first time I went to go do it, I dive in just a little bit, and I started seeing this like pattern start to appear on my pillow. But the really weird part about it was I had 3 cats in the bedroom and they were all staring at the same thing as me. So it was making me wonder, is it just me? Is it just this? Is this just, you know, a drug that people take? Or is there more to this thing? Is there more to this whole idea of consciousness than what we perceive it to be? And, you know, going off that too, cats, of course, everybody believes they'd be able to see through the different dimensions and stuff like that. So maybe they were seeing exactly what I was seeing. So then the next time I do a little bit more, and within that pattern, there's this face that appears, and my cat's looking at me, and it looks at the pillow, and it looks at me. And this is the second time from the same cat. And that's I guess kind of where I'm at right now. I'm still trying to kind of figure out all that kind of stuff, but in a weird way, like I was saying, I feel like all of it's connected, because it's this, like I said, the same kind of ominous feeling of being watched. But when you go on to like the mushroom psychedelic side, and when you're a child, it's more of like the, I don't know, like uplifting kind of side, where you feel like there's something that's happy that's kind of watching you. Where when I was a teenager, and I guess I've had my issues, you know, with alcohol and stuff like that at those times, and I always felt like there was like a dark presence kind of around. So going off that, I had more questions I needed answered. I started trying to better myself with different types of philosophy, different things, like trying to stay in a positive way, so I'm not attracting anything negative, I guess. And the farther I go into this podcasting, the more it seems like stuff starts to pop up. So I'm trying to stay on the positive side of things, so that I don't bring anything bad my way, I guess. But again, just more questions. And I'm always going to have all these questions. And the farther I go in, and if anybody else has had these kind of experiences, I'd more than love to talk to you. Maybe we can, you know, start to figure out these mysteries, all the different mysteries of the universe, because in a way, they're all connected. They got to be.
Now, when you said you felt the dark presence sort of shift, like from a more of a positive thing to more of a dark thing, do you think that directly reflected what was going on in your life at that time? I mean, you mentioned alcohol, you mentioned, you know, sort of being down on yourself or something to that degree. But when I hear that, I sort of think like, well, what if it's your higher self watching you? You know, your higher self being a reflection of you is giving you that ominous feeling, letting you know like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be drinking as much as you're drinking, or etc. You know, I'm only getting to know you here for 20 minutes now, you know, give or take a few minutes. So I can't pretend like I know for sure. Of course, you would obviously know far more than I would about your own life. So that's really up for you to determine. But that's what it sounds like to me, man, you know, and I'm not, you know, any guru or anything like that. But I've translated that feeling of being watched into my higher self watching me, because I feel like part of the deception that goes on is keeping us separated from our higher self, keeping us separated from the spiritual world. And, you know, when we hear that or feel that, it's easier to think it's a ghost or some kind of external explanation that they give us rather than, you know, something going on within. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I've felt that feeling recently, and you're sort of reminding me of this sort of way of seeing it, because it's really not, in my opinion, you know, and this might not be true for your experience, but in my opinion, it feels like my higher self is watching me in those moments where maybe I'm doing something that I shouldn't have done, or maybe I'm not being as responsible as I need to be, or maybe I'm being careless, or whatever it may be, you know. But what do you think about that?
No, I mean, I completely agree. As far as like me when I was a teenager and going through all that, I kind of lived in a, I guess you can't do it kind of house where they didn't want you to ask why. I wasn't able to leave a lot. So I spent a lot of my time just kind of researching stuff on the internet. And I've always kind of been, I guess, that black sheep. I was always looking into conspiracies and stuff like that. But I guess I had this weird period when I was a teenager where it was kind of like a crossroads between expanding your mind and compressing your mind. And when I was in the process of, when I was drinking and stuff like that, I was more concerned with, trying to fit in with the crowd. And I was kind of like repressing myself in order to like fit in with everybody else, you know? So when I kind of came to realizations in my life that was never who I wanted to be, and I always just want to kind of be my own person, I'm content being the black sheep. And now finding this kind of community, it's just been great. Just feel like the times are brighter, you know? So it could be your outer self watching you. It could be that we're all, the same consciousness in a sense. That's another thing that I've always believed in, because I feel like the meaning to life is honestly experience. And if the meaning of the life is experience, then who's to say we're not just all the same consciousness watching ourselves from different angles, you know? And that's why, the things that drive you crazy in other people are aspects that you may need to change within yourself.
That's a great point. Yeah, the things that drive you crazy in other people may be aspects that you need to change within yourself. I think that was very well said, and it's well worth repeating. Who knows, maybe we'll put that in the intro. But yeah, man, that's where we're at right now. I feel like, there's sort of an unraveling going on, for worse or for better, of what society used to be. And psychedelics play a role in that. I mean, were psychedelics a part of you sort of shifting away from alcohol? Had you been doing psychedelics at that same time? Because I was around people when I was sort of college aged that, they would drink, they would do mushrooms, but there was no spiritual anything going on. It was like synonymous, like, oh, tonight we're gonna, take it up a notch and do mushrooms, and we're gonna have a crazy fucking time. But it was never like, yeah, we're gonna do mushrooms, and then the next day someone's like, hey guys, have you ever thought that like money's kind of weird? Like nobody ever really seen. And I can't speak, maybe people were more close guarded with those kind of revelations, but I was never shy with those kind of things, and never really fielded well. People would hear me say these sorts of things and they would be like, oh yeah, okay, that's and then less and less they would talk to you. It was sort of the dry sort of disinterest. But yeah, I wonder, were psychedelics a part of abstaining or moving away from alcohol for you, or were they just a part of it the whole time?
As a teenager, I didn't really I always smoked weed, of course, because that's always just been something that kind of helps me like stay level, in the sense of it helps me think outside of the box, and I appreciate being able to think outside of the box. It helps me, like, when I'm stuck in a situation, I can kind of step back and think of it from another perspective and not get so frustrated. And I mean, that's also helped me to become a great problem solver when it comes to a lot of things. I can rig stuff up, I can figure all that out. But I dabble a little bit with like other, I mean, I guess some people consider it psychedelic. It's in the same family, I guess, but I only dabbled a little bit as far as like high school and stuff like that goes. But I got into a really bad time where I was drinking like crazy, and I ended up almost losing my family, where my lady was going to leave me, that I'm still currently with. And I knew I need to make a huge life change. So I figured I would try LSD as more so like I heard it helps people get over alcoholism, and it didn't necessarily start off as becoming like a spiritual thing. But after my first experience with it, and I realized all of these mistakes I'd been making and all these issues that I had brought upon myself from the first place, it became more of a spiritual thing to me, where I would do it as I felt needed and stuff like that. But every single time I did it, I always saw it as like a tool. I never necessarily saw it as like something to go and get messed up on. And I would do it by myself, and my girlfriend would go to bed, and I just kind of be on my own spiritual journey around the house. And, you know, I'd go outside and, you know, hang out in my backyard and stuff like that. And I just come to just my own kind of like philosophy, I guess you could say, from that. So then branching off of that, like I was saying earlier, I learned how to do like mycology and stuff, and never for the aspect of trying to make money off of it. I learned it from a good friend, and then I took it a little bit farther as far as like learning how to make a better method for it. And it was just mainly meant for me and my close friends that I felt wanted to use it as a tool and weren't trying to use it as like a party drug, because I was super particular that I would never let anybody take it that was using as a party drug. It was mainly just like my close friends that wanted to experience it, and they wanted somebody that was, you know, not going to mess with them and stuff, so they could experience it or calm them down. So I kind of became that guy for them for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's made some huge drastic changes in my life, and none of them negative. Helped me stay away from, as I would say, like the bad drugs, because psychedelics, as long as you're using them properly as a tool, I mean, they're honestly character builders. As far as I'm concerned, even bad trips can become a great experience that you can learn from. And even going through like alcoholism and stuff like that, I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. So all the bad experiences that anybody's gone through in their life, or that I've gone through in my life, I feel like you're meant to go through those things because you were strong enough to go through those things. And then now that you have gone through those things, it now makes you that much more mentally strong of a person, that if you hadn't gone through those, you wouldn't be as level-headed as you are now. So I don't regret any of it. A lot of synchronicities in life that I've noticed, as far as like you have the right intentions and the right things happen, where there's something awful that happens now and you're mad about it in the situation, and then you realize that way farther down the road, it ends up becoming like a positive thing that would have never happened if that negative thing didn't happen. So even that starts sparking my interest in like law of duality and stuff like that, you know, it has to be bad to be a good. And it just fluctuates back and forth from there. And psychedelics played a huge part in all of that.
Yeah, and that's something that I think a lot of people get sort of, I don't know exactly what the right word, but maybe disappointed maybe is the right word, because they hear about synchronicities maybe from the standpoint of like a listener, and I'm talking about myself in, you know, past years specifically, where you sort of like expect more than you really are entailed to deserve, so to speak, whatever that means karmically, whatever you're really, you know, you kind of have like maybe too high of hopes, and then like something that seems like a disappointment at first almost takes like a 180 flip turn and becomes something that's actually a great opportunity, or vice versa. I mean, one example of that for me is COVID. I mean, for the whole world, myself included, it was pretty a huge bummer. You know, for some people, it was incredibly devastating and, you know, tragic even. But, you know, with that opportunity to quit my job, I don't know if that would have come without such a great, you know, huge disaster, right? Like, not that it's like a sweepstake or anything, you know, I'm working my ass off to keep this going, and it's not exactly like a sweet deal or anything, you know, but it's fun, and it's something that I've always wanted to do. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like, for a while I was just like down on myself, delivering, you know, packages, listening to podcasts, wishing I was the guy on the podcast. And you know, maybe I could have, if I was more motivated, gotten further with the podcast I did at that time, the Bud Triangle, which was kind of a small show. We only did 10 episodes. But yeah, it's just, you know, it's so weird how everything unfolds, you know, and I think even like really the best synchronicities are the ones that you see in hindsight, not the ones that you're like lining up in the present moment. Because I think that's where you get in that tricky area of like disappointment and like expectations, and like what you said earlier, intention. I think that's the clearest thing that you can put forward, not an expectation, not a desire, but an intention, because an intention entails that you're doing something rather than receiving something. And that's a big part of this sort of equation, is like the universe gives to those who give and gives back to those who give back, and vice versa, you know, and so on and so forth. But I think the other thing about synchronicities that I get a little shy about it, because it gets personal, you know, like you talked about, you know, your miscarriage. I mean, that's something that's can be really devastating to a couple, and it's really cool to hear that you have children, right? And I don't know the timing on that, but maybe that boy has already been born or is going to be born soon. So either way, congratulations. And that's the kind of thing that we need more of, you know, like the globalists, whoever they are, you know, they can win when we have less and less of us. But, you know, like this whole incentive to, you know, kids, don't have kids, be, you know, whatever, you know, gender you want to be. It's like, that's depopulation, man. So when I hear and see a young dude like yourself and you got multiple kids, it's really awesome. Like, you know, I myself haven't gotten there yet, but you know, it's definitely on my short list for the next 5-10 years. We'll see.
It's one of those things too that it made me grow up fast, so I don't regret it. I have she's going to be 7, my daughter.
Oh, wow.
And then my son's about to be 4 months. So on a journey. And honestly, part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast and I finally got this push to do this was for them, because I want to raise them to be free thinkers and to think for themselves. I've never been the one they ask me a question and I'll tell them the answers to it when I do online school with them and stuff like that. And I'll tell them that these other answers could be correct, but this is the answer they want. And I'll tell you why these other answers could be correct. And I just explain to them all these things. And I want them to always wonder why and always have that fascination to learn why and not just believe exactly everything anybody tells them. I made an analogy with Juan on my last podcast saying that it's almost like people like us and free thinkers would see something where it's 2 + 2 = 4. And there's no doubt in our mind because we see the evidence and it would be 4, where a lot of people in the world would see 2 + 2 = 5, not because they looked at what the actual answers are to create that, but because that's what they've always been told and what they're programmed to believe. So they don't even question the pieces that they have. They just think that that's the answer. And that's what it breaks down to for a lot of things that you look into, like even in Egypt, for example, where they're talking about the tools that they built the pyramids with. You put the pieces together and those tools wouldn't work to break those stones or to, you know, break those stones apart and stuff. So, you know, just because the pieces are there and that's what it is, you got to put it together yourself to realize that the answer may be different than what they're telling you the actual answer is.
Right. Now, when they say 2 + 2 = 5, are you joking, or is that something that they seriously are teaching in Common Core?
No, that is just an analogy. It's just because
I've heard people say things like that.
Put the pieces together.
Yeah, no, I've heard people say things like that though. Like parents say that, and as someone who's not a parent, you know, I'm curious if that's really true. But it's wild how the education system's changed, even from when we were. You know, I'm assuming you're around the same age as me, even from when we were kids. You know, so who's to say 20 years before us, 40 years, 60 years, 80 years before us, what they were teaching then? You know, it's changed so much. I think that's a part of keeping our generations divided, and hence the name of the show, hence a lot of what you've experienced. You know, like try talking about psychedelics with your grandfather, like, or grandmother, if they're still around. Like, good luck. They're not, they have no concept whatsoever, no concept. I mean, depending on how young they are, but like my 90-year-old grandmother, try to explain to her what a psychedelic mushroom is, and she'll look at you like you're crazy. You know, like they understand like someone being high,
like you're a criminal,
or yeah, I mean, for sure, you know, depending on what state you're in, that's no longer true. Not my state, so I've never done any of that. It's all allegedly. But
we're luckily decriminalized now, so I should be all good in Michigan.
Right on, dude, right on. But yeah, you know, it's just so interesting how quickly things have turned upside down. You know, you talk about the, you know, older generation. I was just having a conversation with my grandma about these like world books that, you know, maybe are way before your generation, because it's before my generation. I only know about it because of them. You know, these people would come around door to door and sell you like encyclopedias, you know. So my grandparents, you know, sometime in the 60s or 70s bought these like world books, and it's like A, B, C, these big heavy books, and it's pretty cool stuff, you know. Pre-internet, you could learn about all these different places, all these different things, concepts, you know, you name it. It's like a huge expanded encyclopedia, you know. And
it's funny you mentioned that, because my mom actually had a set of those when I was a kid. I don't know what happened to them, but she said it was her grandma's, and she had the full set, and it was a blue leatherback cover. I remember seeing them, and it took up like a whole bookshelf.
Yeah, well, she has them, and I was talking about how, you know, I found some at a tag sale, so, you know, maybe she should pass them on to, you know, one of my cousin's kids. You know, they're all like younger than teenage age, and she looked at me and she's like, they're never gonna read those. They all look at their little phones all the time. I'm like, yeah, you got a point there. I mean, for 90 years old, she's not totally out of it, you know. She gets that much, but yeah, it's so interesting to see how things change, you know. So that's another thing that I want to highlight with what you just said, is like teaching your kids these things, taking initiative in that area. You know, unfortunately, the way our society is geared, a lot of parents up until maybe the pandemic didn't have a lot of time with their kids because of work, and, you know, you maybe have family who watches them or pay for daycare. I was, you know, going to daycare when I was a kid, and then I went to, you know, school, and then after school, I would hang out with all my friends, you know, and I barely spend any time with my parents. And it's really cool to see you taking that initiative, because I think that's, you know, for whatever reason, I was benefited by that, but I don't think that's the case. I think I'm an outlier. I don't think that's the case for everybody. You know, I kind of I thrived in that loneliness of kind of just being off on my own and having the freedom to not be judged. But it was sort of a similar environment to what you mentioned, like a you can't do that kind of house. You use a similar phrase that I liked, you know, no, can't do that kind of house, you know, like that's very much what my house was like. And I learned pretty fast, you know, like what things I could get away with and what things I couldn't get away with. And I always tried to push those boundaries, you know. I never did anything too reckless, but definitely pushed those boundaries. But yeah, so you got this new podcast. Sounds like you're interviewing some fantastic guests. You've had Juan podcast host Juan, my buddy from Illuminati Confirmed. We do a show together. What are you going to tackle with this podcast, brother? I mean, obviously you're interested in consciousness, spirituality, psychedelics, but are there any other big topics that are on the, you know, docket for what you want to cover? Maybe even guests that you have in mind. You know, what are your goals with the new podcast?
As far as what I want to tackle, I mean, I definitely want to get into ancient cultures for sure. I want to get more into ancient religions and stuff like that, and ancient texts. Definitely love to get into expanded consciousness concepts, cryptids, of course, any type of interdimensional things, theories on our reality that we might exist in. Honestly, any alternative topic would be great. That's all I want to cover, because like I said, I'm trying to make this almost like a chronicle for my kids, so that later on in life they can listen to these episodes if they have these weird questions that other people want to talk to them about. Or, you know, I'll talk to them, but, you know, they can be introduced into the topics, you know, so that they'll know what they want to come talk to me about. And then I could have these different people. As far as guests and stuff like that, so far I've kind of talked to like podcasters and stuff, but I'd love to, you know, start talking to different authors or different people that have had different experiences, different stories, people that have, you know, interesting philosophy that I might want to hear about, because I'm always interested in psychology and philosophy and different like ways you can like train your mind to do different things to improve yourself, as going back into the character building, like I was saying with psychedelics. Yeah, I mean, just trying to tackle a little bit of everything. All my personal questions, all kind of staying on the alternative realm.
Right. Now, on that point of character building, were there any sort of paranormal, strange, weird experiences that came from using psychedelics? Some people say that, and I'm thinking of myself here, because I remember saying this a couple of times, that it seems like psychedelics ramp up synchronicities. I don't remember quite who I got that from, but yeah, was that true for your experience?
I'd say so. Actually, I have this really weird experience that I used to do with my friends. When I used to take LSD and stuff, you get this like weird foresight where I used to be able to like cover my eyes and they'd put up like fingers behind me and I'd be able to tell what the fingers were. And I'd get like fascinated on these like weird little sounds. And I found this like weird sound in the back of the house that I'd hear over everything. So yeah, just kind of expanded into a different other weird aspects, I guess, as far as like synchronicities and stuff like that from taking that. So I'm trying to think of if there's any crazy ones that lined up with anything. I mean, just that the thing with the cats, like I was telling you, that anytime I'd experience like weird things, my cats would kind of be looking in that direction too. And that's why I kind of started believing that there might be stuff that's, you know, just outside of our eyesight in a way, where if, you know, they say people can only see 7% of the light spectrum. I mean, there could be other things that are around us that are just undescribable to us because they're in a different light spectrum. Like bees can see ultraviolet light. We can't see ultraviolet light. And I mean, even with that whole thing, I believe that there's like layers to it. It's almost like that concept that the next layer up can interact with this layer, but we can't interact with them. So when you take like DMT, mushrooms, stuff like that, I feel like you kind of start getting into that wavelength. And that's why people describe like the DMT entities as being like surprised that they're there. Like, oh, why are you here right now? How'd you get here? It's because you're not supposed to be able to see those kinds of things. But yeah, and then even going off that, I mean, we perceive things as being like carbon based, of course, to be like living things, but the things all around us that could be living could be totally made of a totally different thing. They could be a light based being. And we just totally don't even understand the concept of how they even exist, let alone, you know, to say that they exist. Like, it sounds crazy to say something exists fully of light, but I'm sure to something else that exists fully of light, the whole concept of like a carbon-based being is also extremely weird concept because they don't perceive like how we would ingest and take things in, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some things I've read that suggest that in the ancient past, there were beings that were not solid and carbon based like we are. They were something like a gas based being, and they were, you know, the inhabitants of Hyperborea. But you know, that's more of a sort of speculation, I guess, or just maybe passed on tradition. Who knows how true that could be? But in your neck of the woods is a lot of paranormal tales. Have you ventured out into any weird areas in Michigan in search of Bigfoot or anything like that? I have heard about some Michigan Bigfoot before, and the Great Lakes region definitely has some weird stuff going on. We talked to Lon Strickler maybe 24 episodes ago, and he had a lot to say about the Chicago area. I don't know how close you are to there, but I'm almost certain that if they're flying over the lake near Chicago, they might be flying in Michigan too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we got a bunch of interesting stuff in Michigan. We got the Michigan Wolfman that appears every 10 years, ending with 7. So hopefully we'll have something interesting going on in the next 5 years. And as I build up this podcast, I want to start kind of doing more investigating myself. But as far as like my own personal experience, there's this old psychiatric hospital. They got abandoned. It was called Northville Psychiatric Hospital. I used to frequently explore it just for the sake of it with a couple of my friends and my girlfriend and stuff. And we got to the point where we were so good at going around this place that we had it all mapped out. We'd be watching people get arrested coming into this place while we're sitting up on the roof and stuff like that. So as it goes farther into it, we started hearing about these weird stories about people falling down the elevator shafts. And I know there was 2 particular stories for sure that happened, and it just seemed extremely weird, especially if you've been in that place, because the doors are like half shut. So unless somebody was leaning through it on purpose, like something weird was more than likely going on there. And as soon as that stuff started happening, there started being a lot more police around there. They started watching it a lot more because ironically the police station was right next door. So we used to park way the hell away and we'd walk in through the woods and stuff like that. So again, just a bunch of weird stuff going on. So we started kind of exploring more. So we never really went into the basement, and there's this whole tunnel system that goes underneath Northville altogether, and some of the entrances to it start at this hospital. So we fully mapped all the buildings to the hospital. We never really gone too deep into the basement because it was completely pitch black down there. So we started going down there, and we started noticing that there was a bunch of like people would paint weird ritual looking symbols everywhere. So then I started questioning the fact of if maybe somebody, it's the whole concept of if you keep hoping something will come, something will eventually come. So if people keep making these weird symbols, doing all this weird stuff in these basements and tunnels, which were already supposedly haunted, like weird things would start happening. So one particular day we go down into the basement and I walk into this room and I remember there being like a little buggy, like just a little push cart, like where you push you like through a hallway that had like little supplies and stuff like that on it. And it's pitch black in there. I have a little headlamp on my head. And as I walk in, I kind of like pan over and I hear a voice coming from the side that just said run. And as I heard that, I don't even know how to describe it. I have pictures of it. I could actually send you after the show where it was kind of like an ominous picture of it. But there's like a tall white being with black hair, and it stood up. And as it stood up, I didn't even take any chances, anything else. Me and the other two people I was with, we just took off down the hallway. They both saw it. So going back into that, I wanted to figure out too if it was some type of calling from why this place may be haunted or whatever, or if it was something else completely different. So I started looking into like Native American maps on like where the tribes would overlay. And I started looking into like Northville area, and they said that when they were building that city, they found a lot of like Native American artifacts and stuff like that. So then I started questioning if it may have something to do with that in particular. And I guess there was a high area of where they found random artifacts where they built this Northville hospital. And looking into things, what's the word for it? I can't find any good pictures of it in particular. And usually it refers to more of like a wolf man. But from the like description of it being like an ex-human cannibal type figure, it begins with a W.
Wendigo?
Yeah. Yep. I started finding like every trail I started going to, looking up what this thing could have been, kind of trailed back towards that, but it went more towards that, like the definition rather than like the picture drawings of it. Because the more I looked into the definition from the Native American standpoint, it was more that it was
Like
a human at one point that, what was that?
Like a werewolf type being, like a human that's turned into like a dog type creature, dogman type creature.
Yeah, that's what the pictures I found was, but what I saw wasn't anything like that. The best way to describe it was like a tall, lanky being with black hair, but I didn't get to see the face. I saw it standing up, and I just saw the hair from the back, and I saw just the white. And
like skin.
Yes, like skin. Like really, really like hadn't been in sun in years skin, you know? So looking into the definitions for these things, I found ones where they were using that same wording, but it wasn't like a dog man. It was basically saying that it was a person that resorted to cannibalism that basically like they started turning into this creature from eating like human flesh. And there's these Native American tales of that. And that's when I started questioning whether, you know, it was something like that, or if it was somebody playing a prank on me, or if it was something else that had to do with the weird symbols and stuff like that in the basement. But as I started getting into it a little bit more, like I was saying, they started getting a little bit more strict in there, and they ended up tearing the building down. So I kind of just, it is where it is right now, and I can't really do too much more with it because now they're building retirement homes, I believe, on top of where that's at now. But
Right.
it's a very weird experience that I got two other people that
Now,
saw it firsthand. And like I was saying, after the show, I can send you a picture of the picture I did get of this thing.
Yeah, no, please do. How closer is that place to water? Like a river, lake, even the Great Lakes? Is it proximal to any? I mean, Michigan's got a lot of water, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm in the Detroit area, so it's a little bit, it's close to Detroit. So I'd say that there's probably water within like 5 to 10 miles of it for sure. I know that there's like little like rivers and stuff like that that run through Northville. So there's definitely some moving water over there.
I have Peter Champoux's book in my hands right now because I know that I definitely recommend that you get this because he plots out the Great Lakes in a chapter, and I wonder if this particular place lines up with his arcs. Let's see. Yeah, he has a lot of amazing stuff in this book, Gaia Matrix. If you haven't listened to those interviews with Peter, this is actually going to be coming out on the tail end of my second interview with Peter Champoux. So everybody listening to this will have already just listened to Peter Champoux. But I definitely want to show you this. But while I'm looking for this, tell the folks where they can follow up with you, where they can find your podcast, what you're going to be up to. I know you got an Instagram. Let us know what's going on, Shane.
So if anybody's interested in possibly being a guest on the show, or they got some interesting stories that they want to share with me, or, you know, they want to sponsor the show, anything like that, any questions whatsoever, if anybody's interested or has any type of interest in the show, you can email me, which would be inquiries of our reality podcast at outlook.com. Instagram, it's inquiries of our reality. Facebook, it's inquiries of our reality podcast. And Patreon, it's inquiries of our reality podcast. Because my goal, hopefully, is that right now I'm a cannabis grower, and it's extremely corporate where I work at. And it kind of drives me crazy just because I have a different kind of love for the plant. So I'm hoping that if I keep progressing this, that I can start doing my own research as far as like going out in the field and kind of figuring stuff out. So, you know, if anybody's interested in donating to the Patreon and helping me out, or if anybody, you know, wants to join the team, so to speak, or has anything that they can help me out with, I'd be more than happy to hear it. I've always been about full freedom of speech and entertaining any idea until proven that it's false. So, you know, even if you don't think normal people would believe you, I mean, anybody that wants to contact me, have at it. I'll be the first one to sit down and listen to you, man.
Right on. I love it. So for the video viewers, we got the recording going. This will be out on Rockfin as its own video, separate from the Peter Champoux interview. But yeah, definitely check that out. Detroit does line up on this sort of thing, and I guess Sault Ste. Marie, I think that's French.
Sault Ste. Marie, yes, it's one of those Michigan words.
Yeah, okay, Sault Ste. Marie, okay. So that's up in like that Upper Peninsula area, and I guess that's sort of the zenith point, the midpoint of this arrangement that Peter found here. But yeah, very fascinating stuff. And you're growing bud out there in Michigan. I've had a very similar experience with Massachusetts bud, just being very corporate. Not that I worked in the industry, but I have driven up there and checked out the recreational stuff that they have going on. And it's not the only state where I've been to recreational dispensaries, so I have a sort of, you know, gauge for what other ones look like. And I was very disappointed for that same reason, just very corporate. And even though Connecticut's not quite up there yet with their recreational dispensaries, it is recreationally legal here now. So who knows what'll happen? But as far as I know,
Michigan.
Yeah, as far as I know, you know, Connecticut is probably one of the most corporate, just because they use like pharmaceutical names instead of like actual bud names. Like, so instead of, you know, Girl Scout cookies, they'll call it like, you know, some sort of Latinized like Hydros Lexus Myflosis, you know, like some bullshit that you'd see in like a pharmaceutical commercial, you know, at the bottom of the screen. So
side effects may include.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's anywhere like that, because I think Michigan, especially Ann Arbor, you guys are like pretty forward. I mean, not that I'm pretty sure Ann Arbor is not too far from Detroit, but it's not exactly the same place. But Ann Arbor, if I'm correct, was like way early in the game as far as decriminalizing things. So you guys, I wouldn't be surprised if you guys have a sort of a more true cannabis culture there, outside of maybe these new corporate influences. I mean, there's a bill on the House floor right now, I think, in the United States Senate to take the Schedule 1 cannabis and bring it down to like decriminalized. I'm pretty sure. I'm not certain if that's going to get passed, or maybe if that was just some random story that was fake news. You can never be too sure. But yeah, what inspired you to start working in the cannabis industry outside just loving smoking pot? Because I wanted to do that for a while. It just kind of happened too late in this state. I've already been doing other things by the time it all got in full swing.
I'd always had a love for it, of course. So it was kind of just like the right things fell in the right place at the right time. I was working a really crappy job, and I was just listening to, like I was saying, different philosophers, different like audio books, different podcasts, just trying to learn new things because I had to like entertain my brain while I was just doing like a meaningless job. So they got wind that I was trying to get to my point where I was there for 2 years so I could get 2 weeks paid, so I could take those 2 weeks off and find a new job and essentially not come back and get paid to be gone for those 2 weeks. So they quick tried to fire me before that. So I just happened to have a family member that at the time that was starting for this new cannabis company called Gage. And they weren't even established yet. They're just starting to build their grows in their buildings and stuff like that. So he pulled me on as a general laborer, just, helping to tear down like the old buildings to start building these new grows. And I ended up pulling my girlfriend in too. And we just showed how good we could work and stuff like that. So the head grower to the company ended up, working with us side by side because we were the first 2 hourly employees for the company and stuff. And he pulled us over and pretty much said like, hey, do you guys want to, work on the grow side and stuff? So then we kind of just learned while we were doing it there. And we kind of started where like the starting off point was for Michigan. Like Gage has a contract with cookies. So we're the only state, we're the only grow in Michigan that's actually allowed to have actual cookies product. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, we're 3 years later and I've just watched it progress where the very beginning, it was just full of love. The flower looked great. Everything looked great. Everybody was happy. There were some dark times with certain people that were like leaders and stuff. But eventually my girlfriend and I ended up becoming like the cultivation leaders. And, we're just very easygoing people. So it kind of fits the mood of the whole place and everything. But as we've taken into that spot where we can kind of make everybody kind of a team, then corporate started coming in and now they're just making it so it's just all about as much product for as little cost as possible. The quality's still there, definitely better than a lot of places. Michigan still has some of the best product, I'd say, in the United States for sure, depending on where you get it from, of course, just like anywhere. But, it's just the love's just not there anymore. It's just corporate greed. And I'm just waiting for it to be like that Marlboro concept where they start adding stuff to it to preserve it longer. And then it's like, weed won't be good for you anymore because it's just another thing that just gets taken over by big corporation that start off with love. And that's why it's like, I'd love to see psychedelics legal and stuff too. But I know that the same thing's going to happen to them and they're just going to learn how to like farm factory them and take out all the shaman people and all the people that care about the plant as it is and just make it so that in Michigan, at least, they made a bunch of laws so that the little guys can't even exist anymore. So they just try to push all the little guys out so they can take over and it drives me crazy. So it's like, they should be decriminalized for sure, but I almost wish to an extent that they weren't legal per se because they get into the wrong people's hands and then they're not what they used to be,
Right. Well, and I think what they've done on the West Coast, because they were sort of the outside of maybe some of the renegades out in your neck of the woods, the people in the West Coast kind of got behind that early and you saw the difference there. I mean, with the law situation compared to what we have on the East Coast, they're a lot freer to grow their own product, grow their own cannabis and do whatever they want with it in certain states than they are in others, particularly Connecticut. Like they recreationalized it, but then they're like, but you can't start growing until 2024, some crazy number like that. And it's obvious why they did that. They want the corporations to get in and get a chance to build their dispensaries and start their thing going before people get a chance to start growing their own. And it's just, it's obvious where it's going. And I'm someone who thinks that, obviously right now it's not the most ideal being in an apartment, but one day when I do have my own land, I do plan on growing my own plants and no matter where I live. But I remember when I was traveling to Indiana, not a legal state at all. Neither is Ohio, neither is Pennsylvania. So the trip there was a little daunting, but there was part of me that was like, oh, maybe I should drive up to Michigan and check out their legal bud scene. But I just got too spooked and paranoid about it because Ohio cops just love to like follow out of staters and can be really weird. I was getting tailed for like 5 miles one day and it just spooked me real bad. He didn't pull me over, but I was just like, all right, I'm not fucking around with that. I'm not going to Michigan. I ended up just turning east and instead of going north. But have you heard a lot of stories like that? Is there a lot of like out-of-staters that come through to get the Michigan product, or is that all kind of like? Because in Connecticut, it was totally like open border. People in New York, Connecticut, they would just drive straight into Massachusetts, and you could see it in the recreational dispensaries. There's the parking lot's full of like out-of-state plates. Yeah,
we got the same thing going on here. Everybody comes up from Ohio because we got a lot better stuff than Ohio, and I'm sure people come up from Indiana now that it's recreationally legal, so anybody can essentially buy it now in Michigan. But I mean, there's always been a big culture for sure. I mean, they got Hash Bash that happens in Ann Arbor. It's been going on since the 70s, where it started off as a protest where they would block everything off and everybody pretty much smoke weed on this college campus. So then it became a bigger thing where every year, almost every stoner in Michigan has been to it, where it's pretty much just everybody sits on this college campus and everybody just smokes weed together, and it's just a good time. And it's like, there's no negative bad energies. Like, I would go there, and every single time I went there, I would leave with more weed than I had, because people would be like, here, I don't want to drive back to my state with this. Here you go. And they just hand it to everybody. So then, I mean, Michigan's definitely worth coming to. And I mean, there's a joke with Ohio too, same with Michigan people, that, you know, you don't want to mess with the Ohio cops, because in Michigan, the speed limit's 70, so you can go as fast as you want on the freeway, and most cops won't pull you over. So you can be pulling like 90 half the time and nobody will do nothing. Second you get into Ohio, you're going 61, they're on your ass.
Right.
So usually we all try to avoid Ohio and go through Indiana.
I hear that, man. Wow. Well, yeah, I definitely feel like once I get my transmission fixed, who knows when that'll be, I'll be on the road again, free at last, and able to, you know, travel around with my lovely lady Tara and see some stuff, you know. And I definitely want to make my way out to Ohio for the Serpent Mounds, and then I'm sure there's plenty of stuff up there, especially after talking to you, to check out. So fingers crossed the cops won't bother me.
We can go research some stuff together if you ever come up to Michigan.
Yeah, brother, for sure. I'm almost certain that you have mounds in your area. If you're not familiar, there's a book. Hold on a second,
there's a lot of heritage in Michigan. It's just all Native American heritage, so it's like hidden within the land, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking for a book by Fritz Zimmerman. It's called like the Nephilim Chronicles, but it's all about the mounds over in that area. I don't know. It specifically focuses on Ohio mostly, but I'm sure there's mounds up Michigan way too. But yeah, man, so many things to explore. I definitely see myself doing that more often in the coming future. Last few years, you know, last summer particularly, I spent a lot of time driving around this state and New England and getting a better sense of what's going on around here. And I don't know, you know, there's something to like where you live and where you're born that like magnetically like keeps you in a place. So I can't say I know for sure whether I'm going to leave or not, but travel, vacation, yes, for sure. I'll be doing some road trips. And yeah, brother, I got to get you into Alt Media Night. Obviously, you plug your podcast, but for those who are going to go check it out right now in the same podcast player that they're listening to this podcast, remind them what the name of the show is and who they are, who you are, and what they can expect to find there.
I should be across all platforms now. I got approved by Google. I'm on Spotify. I'm on iTunes. I'm on all that stuff. So I should be able to be found across all platforms. The show is called Inquiries of Our Reality. My name's Shane, and what you're going to find is just a bunch of interesting topics about just scattered things. I'm actually working on a new intro, actually. If you want, I can read it here to you. It's the reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality.
Love it. That's a beautiful way to end this, and I do hope folks go and check out Inquiries of Reality. I'm certain that we'll have an Alt Media United page for your show very soon. And wow, what an episode. Thank you so much, brother. Definitely.
I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely came at the right time. Renewed my faith in podcasting. I had a long day. Here we are. So thank you so much, folks, for being here, and have a great moment wherever you are in the now.